The stagecoach rattled into Cedar Ridge just after noon, and Clara Holloway pressed her forehead against the dusty window, watching the town materialize through pine trees and mountain shadows. Her fingers clutched a worn carpet bag that held everything she owned: 3 dresses, a silver hairbrush that had been her mother's, and $43 she'd saved over 2 years of working in a Denver boarding house. She'd come here because the advertisement had promised work, a teaching position, room and board included. Nobody asking questions about where she'd been before, or why she'd left, or what mistakes still followed her like ghosts. The driver yanked the brake. The coach lurched to a stop. But something was wrong. Clara climbed down expecting a quiet mountain town. Instead, she found chaos. People crowded the main street in a tight knot, shouting, pushing, their voices rising in an ugly chorus. She couldn't see what held their attention, but she heard the rage in their words. "Get 'em up there. Should have done this years ago. Justice don't wait forever." Clara's stomach tightened. She'd seen mobs before, watched what ordinary people became when fear turned them mean. She grabbed her bag and tried to move past them toward the hotel, but the crowd had swallowed the street entirely. "Excuse me," she said to a woman at the edge. "What's happening?" The woman barely glanced at her. "They're finally dealing with that murderer, Cole. Should have strung him up 6 years back instead of letting him hide on that mountain." "Strung him up?" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You mean hang him? That's what we do with men who burn their families alive." The words hit Clara like cold water. She pushed forward without thinking, her bag forgotten at her feet. The crowd pressed tight, smelling of sweat and something uglier. That sour excitement people get when violence stops being a threat and becomes entertainment. In the center of the mob stood a man, tall, maybe 35. Dark hair falling past his collar, face covered in several days of stubble. His shirt was torn at the shoulder and dried blood crusted near his temple where someone had already hit him. But what struck Clara hardest was his expression. Nothing. No fear, no anger, no pleading. He just stood there like he'd already left his body behind and was watching from somewhere far away. "Ethan Cole," a gray-haired man announced, his voice carrying authority. "You've been accused of murdering your wife and children. This town has waited long enough for justice." "We don't need a trial," someone shouted. "Everyone knows what he did. Killed them for insurance money. Burned them alive." The accused man, Ethan, didn't respond, didn't defend himself, didn't even look at the faces surrounding him. A younger man with a sheriff's badge stood off to the side, his hand resting on his gun but his eyes uncertain. "Silas, maybe we should..." "Should what, Tom?" The gray-haired man cut him off. "Let him walk away again? My brother saw what he did. The whole town knows. Justice delayed is justice denied." Silas. Clara recognized power when she heard it, the kind of voice that expected obedience. Someone brought forward a rope. The crowd pressed closer, and Clara watched Ethan Cole's face as that noose came into view. Still nothing. Like he'd stopped fighting so long ago, he'd forgotten what resistance even looked like. That emptiness terrified her more than any of the violence around them, because she knew that look. She'd worn it herself once, that expression of someone who'd been ground down so completely by loneliness and accusation that they'd stopped believing mercy existed anywhere in the world. Before Clara fully understood what she was doing, her feet were moving. She shoved through the crowd, ignoring the protests, until she stood directly in front of Ethan Cole. The mob noise faltered. She looked up at him. He was taller than she'd realized, and saw his eyes focus on her for the first time. Brown eyes. Exhausted. Waiting for whatever fresh cruelty came next. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know if the accusations were true. Didn't know anything except that hollow look in his face and the certainty that if she walked away right now, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering if she could have stopped it. "Marry me," she said. The entire street went silent. Ethan stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" His voice came out rough, unused to speaking. "Marry me," Clara repeated, louder this time. "Right now, in front of everyone." "Lady, you've lost your mind," someone shouted. "Who the hell are you?" Silas pushed forward, his face red with anger. "This isn't your business." Clara kept her eyes on Ethan. "I'm making it my business. He's accused of a crime, but he hasn't been tried, hasn't been convicted. You can't just hang a man in the street. We don't need some stranger telling us." "Then tell me what evidence you have." Clara spun to face Silas directly. "Real evidence. Not rumors. Not suspicion. What proof? Silas's jaw worked. Everyone knows. What everyone knows isn't evidence. It's gossip. Clara's voice cut through the crowd like a blade. And if you hang him without proof, you're not dispensing justice. You're committing murder yourselves. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. She's got a point, Silas. She's a stranger who doesn't know what happened here. Then tell her, Ethan said quietly. Everyone turned. It was the first time he'd spoken beyond that initial confused what. Tell her what you think I did, Ethan continued, his voice flat. Tell her the story you've been repeating for 6 years. Silas's face darkened. You killed your wife. Your children. Set fire to your own house for the insurance money. My brother Marcus saw you. Your brother saw smoke, Ethan interrupted. That's all he saw. He saw you running from the house. I was trying to save them. For just a moment, emotion cracked through Ethan's voice, raw and bleeding. Then it was gone again, locked away. But believe what you want. You have for 6 years already. Clara turned back to him. Did you do it? Ethan met her eyes. No. One word, simple, final. And Clara believed him. Maybe that made her a fool. Maybe she was wrong. But she'd spent her life learning to read people. Learning to see the difference between a man who hurt others and a man who'd been hurt so badly he'd stopped defending himself. Then marry me, she said again. If we're married, they can't touch you without going through me first. Why? Ethan's question was barely a whisper. Why would you do this? Clara didn't have a good answer. Because I'm tired of watching people destroy each other over stories that might not even be true. This is insane, the sheriff said, but he sounded relieved rather than angry. Silas, if they're married, it doesn't change what he did. It changes what you can do about it right now. The sheriff stepped between Silas and Ethan. If she's willing to bind herself to him, that's her choice. And it means he's not alone anymore. Which means this stops, right now. The crowd shifted, uncertain. The entertainment had turned complicated. Silas looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara saw calculation in his eyes. Whatever power he held in this town, it didn't extend to approving lynchings in front of a witness willing to call it what it was. Fine, Silas spat. But when he shows his true nature, when he hurts her like he hurt his family, that's on your conscience. He pointed at the sheriff, then turned and shoved through the crowd. The mob began to dissolve, disappointed and confused. Clara stood there shaking, only now realizing what she'd just done. Ethan hadn't moved. You don't have to actually. Yes, I do. Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. I meant it. We'll get married. Today, if possible. Why? There it was again. That question she couldn't quite answer. Because everyone deserves someone who sees them as human, Clara said finally. And right now, I'm all you've got. Something shifted in Ethan's face. Not gratitude exactly. More like shock that anyone would choose to stand beside him instead of against him. The sheriff cleared his throat. I can get the pastor, if you're both serious. We are, Clara said before she could change her mind. Ethan just nodded, still looking at her like she might disappear if he blinked. An hour later, Clara Holloway became Clara Cole in a ceremony so brief and awkward it barely qualified as a wedding. The pastor spoke quickly, clearly uncomfortable. 2 strangers served as witnesses, the hotel owner's wife and a man who ran the general store. Neither smiled. Ethan answered, I do, in a voice that held no emotion at all. Clara's hand shook when she slipped a borrowed ring onto her finger. When it was over, Ethan stood there uncertainly. I have a cabin up in the mountains. It's not much. That's fine. It's isolated. I figured. Most people think I'm dangerous. Clara met his eyes. Most people are wrong about a lot of things. They left Cedar Ridge in a wagon that looked like it might fall apart before reaching the mountain. Clara sat beside her new husband, her husband, and tried to process what had just happened. 24 hours ago, she'd been on a stagecoach heading toward a teaching job. Now she was married to a man accused of killing his family. The rational part of her brain was screaming, but Clara had stopped listening to rational thinking a long time ago. Rational thinking had kept her trapped in situations that slowly killed her spirit. Sometimes the only way forward was to do something completely crazy and hope it led somewhere better. They rode in silence for over an hour. The road climbed steadily, winding through pine forests that blocked out the afternoon sun. The air grew colder. The sounds of civilization faded behind them. "You can leave," Ethan said suddenly. "Once we're at the cabin, there's money hidden there. Enough to get you wherever you want to go. Start over somewhere else." "Is that what you want?" He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know what I want anymore, but I know you shouldn't have tied yourself to me." "Little late for that." "It's not too late. The marriage can be annulled. You can tell people I forced you, or—" "Stop." Clara turned to face him fully. "I made a choice. Maybe it was stupid, probably was stupid, but it was my choice, and I'm not taking it back just because it's inconvenient." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "You don't know me." "You don't know me either." "I could be exactly what they say I am." Clara studied his profile. The exhaustion carved into every line of his face, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like someone expecting a blow. "Are you?" "No." The word came out harsh, angry, like he was furious at himself for still caring whether anyone believed him. "Then that's all I need to know right now." They rode the rest of the way without speaking. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering pines and backed by rocky cliffs. It was small, maybe 2 rooms, with a sagging porch and shutters that needed paint. A creek ran somewhere nearby. Clara could hear the water moving over stones. Ethan brought the wagon to a stop. "This is it." Clara climbed down, her legs stiff from the ride. The cabin looked abandoned, no smoke from the chimney despite the cold, no light in the windows, no sign that anyone had lived here recently. "How long since you've been back?" she asked. 3 days. I came down to town to buy supplies." Ethan's voice was flat again. "They were waiting for me, Silas and his men. They planned this. They've been planning it for 6 years." Ethan carried her bag to the porch, then stopped. "There's a loft upstairs. You can sleep there. I'll stay down here." "Ethan, I'm not—" He cut himself off, jaw tight. "This marriage is legal, but it doesn't have to be real. You saved my life today. I won't ask more from you than that." Clara wanted to argue, but she was exhausted, and Ethan looked like he might shatter if she pushed. "Fine, show me the loft." Inside, the cabin was worse than she'd imagined. Dust covered everything. The fireplace was cold and full of old ash. Dishes sat unwashed in a bucket. It looked exactly like what it was, a place where a broken man had been barely surviving. The loft was reached by a ladder. Clara climbed up and found a single room with a narrow bed and one small window. It smelled musty, but the roof looked solid. "I'll get a fire started," Ethan called from below. Clara sat on the bed and stared at the rough wooden walls. What had she done? She'd married a stranger to save him from a mob. Now she was stuck on a mountain with a man who might be innocent or might be the worst kind of killer. Except she didn't believe he was. That emptiness in his eyes, that wasn't guilt. It was grief so deep it had hollowed him out completely. She'd seen that look before. In the mirror. After her father died. After her mother stopped speaking and just faded away over 6 months until death was a mercy. After Clara had run from the boarding house owner's son, who thought her loneliness made her available. She knew what it looked like when someone had been crushed by the world and forgotten what hope felt like. Downstairs, she heard Ethan moving around. The scrape of wood. The crackle of kindling catching fire. Normal sounds. Human sounds. Clara lay back on this bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd figure out what came next. Tonight, she just needed to breathe. She woke to darkness and the sound of footsteps. At first, still half asleep, Clara thought Ethan was moving around downstairs, but these footsteps were outside, circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. Clara sat up, her heart suddenly pounding. She moved to the window and peered out, but the night was too dark. No moon, just shadows and the vague shapes of trees. The footsteps continued, around the front of the cabin, down the side, behind. Someone was out there. Clara climbed down the ladder as quietly as she could. Ethan was awake, standing near the window with something in his hand. In the dying firelight, she saw it was a rifle. "Is someone—" she started. "Quiet." His voice was barely a whisper. They both stood frozen, listening. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in from all sides. Then from somewhere in the darkness, a voice called out. "You think you can hide up here forever, Cole? You think marrying some desperate woman changes anything?" Clara didn't recognize the voice. Ethan didn't respond. Silas wants you gone, the voice continued. Off this mountain, out of this valley. We're going to make that happen one way or another. Still, Ethan said nothing. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated, fading into the forest. Clara waited until she couldn't hear anything except wind through the trees. Who was that? One of Garrett's men. Ethan set the rifle down but didn't move away from the window. Silas Garrett, the man who wanted to hang me today. Why does he hate you so much? Ethan was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Because he's the one who first accused me. 6 years ago, right after the fire. He told everyone I was guilty, and the whole town believed him. Why would he do that? I don't know. Ethan turned to face her, and in the dim firelight, Clara saw exhaustion and confusion and something that might have been fear. I've asked myself that question every day for 6 years, and I still don't have an answer, but Silas Garrett destroyed my life, and he's not going to stop until I'm dead or gone. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. The cabin suddenly felt very small and very isolated. What are we going to do? We. Ethan shook his head. There is no we. This is my fight. Tomorrow, I'll give you that money I mentioned. You can take the wagon back to town and... No. Clara, I said no. She moved closer, her fear transforming into something sharper. I didn't marry you to abandon you the first time things got difficult. If Garrett's men are going to come after you, they're going to have to deal with me too. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. Clara's voice hardened. I've spent my whole life running from situations I couldn't fix, and I'm tired of it. You want to know why I stepped in front of that mob? Because I'm done being the kind of person who looks away when people need help. I'm done being invisible. And I'm done letting men like Silas Garrett decide who deserves to live and who doesn't. Ethan stared at her like she'd spoken a different language. You're going to get hurt. Probably. Clara tried to smile, but it came out wrong. But at least I'll be hurt doing something that matters. For the first time since she'd met him, something changed in Ethan's expression. Not hope exactly, more like the faint possibility that hope might still exist somewhere in the world. You're insane, he said quietly. Probably that too. They stood there in the darkness, two strangers bound together by a decision neither of them fully understood, while outside the cabin, unseen watchers waited in the trees. And Clara realized with absolute clarity that she'd just walked into something much more dangerous than a simple accusation of murder. This was about power, territory, secrets buried deep enough that someone would kill to keep them hidden. She'd married Ethan thinking she was saving him from a mob. But maybe, just maybe, she'd actually walked straight into the middle of a war that had been building for 6 years. And now there was no way out except through. Morning came too early and too cold. Clara woke to silence and climbed down the ladder to find Ethan already gone. The fire had been rebuilt, and something that smelled almost like coffee sat in a pot near the flames. She poured herself a cup. It tasted terrible, burnt and weak, and stood in the doorway looking out at the mountain. The clearing around the cabin was bigger than she'd realized last night. There were remnants of a garden behind the house, overgrown now with weeds and dead vines. A chicken coop stood empty, its door hanging crooked. Everything showed signs of neglect, like Ethan had stopped caring about maintaining anything years ago. She found him splitting wood near the tree line. His movements were mechanical, efficient. Swing the axe, split the log, stack the pieces, over and over, like he was trying to exhaust himself into not thinking. Clara walked over, carrying the terrible coffee. Morning. Ethan glanced at her, then went back to splitting wood. There's bread in the cupboard, some dried meat. Thank you. Silence. The axe bit into another log. Ethan. What? Clara struggled to find the right words. Last night, those men, are they going to come back? Probably. When? Don't know. He split another log with more force than necessary. Could be today, could be next week. Garrett likes to make people wait, makes them nervous. What does he want? Ethan stopped, the axe balanced on a log. He wants me gone. Off this land. Out of Cedar Ridge. Preferably dead. But why? Just because he accused you 6 years ago? That's the part I can't figure out. Ethan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. Garrett and I barely knew each other before the fire. I had this cabin. He had his ranch down in the valley. We didn't cross paths, didn't have conflicts. Then my house burned, and before the ashes were even cold, he was telling everyone I'd done it on purpose. There has to be a reason. If there is, he's never told me. Ethan picked up the axe again, then set it down. My wife's brother thought maybe it was about land. This cabin sits on a ridge that overlooks good grazing territory. Garrett's been expanding his ranch for years. Maybe he wanted this property and saw an opportunity. That seems extreme. Extreme is what men like Garrett do. There was no anger in Ethan's voice, just exhaustion. They decide they want something, and they take it. And if someone's in the way, they destroy them. Clara looked around at the isolated cabin, the abandoned garden, the emptiness. You've been living up here alone for 6 years? More or less? That's not living. That's just existing. Ethan finally met her eyes. It's all I had left. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Clara wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it better. But she'd learned long ago that some kinds of pain don't respond to comfort. They just have to be survived. Well, she said finally, now you've got me too, for whatever that's worth. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Maybe surprise, maybe disbelief. But it was gone before Clara could identify it. He just nodded once and went back to splitting wood. Clara returned to the cabin and spent the morning trying to make it habitable. She swept dust from every surface, washed dishes that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in months, scrubbed the table until the wood grain showed through years of grime. The work felt good, purposeful, like she was claiming the space instead of just existing in it. By afternoon, the cabin looked almost livable. Clara stood in the center of the main room, surveying her work, when Ethan came inside carrying an armload of firewood. He stopped, looked around. Something in his expression cracked. I didn't... His voice caught. I stopped seeing it, stopped noticing how bad it got. It's not bad anymore, Clara said quietly. Ethan set the wood down carefully, like his hands couldn't quite remember what they were doing. He stood there looking at the clean cabin, at the table Clara had scrubbed, at the dishes stacked neatly on the shelf, at all the small signs that someone cared whether he lived or died. Thank you, he whispered. 2 words. But they came out rough with emotion he'd been burying for years. Clara just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They ate dinner in silence that night. Bread and dried meat and vegetables Clara found in a root cellar that was better stocked than she'd expected. Ethan ate mechanically, like someone who'd forgotten food was supposed to be anything other than fuel. Afterwards, Clara washed the dishes while Ethan fed the fire. The routine felt almost normal, almost like they were a real married couple instead of strangers performing a shared ritual. I should tell you, Ethan said suddenly, about my family. Clara's hands stilled in the wash water. You deserve to know who they were. What happened? Ethan stared into the fire, his face unreadable. My wife's name was Sarah. We'd been married 8 years. She laughed all the time. Found joy in everything. I never understood how she did that, how she could be happy when life was so hard. But she was. His voice didn't waver, but Clara heard the grief underneath it. Our daughter was Emma, 6 years old. She was curious about everything, always asking questions. Papa, why is the sky blue? Papa, where do the birds go in winter? She never ran out of things to wonder about. Clara moved to sit at the table, listening. And our son was Thomas, only 4. He was... Ethan's voice finally cracked. He was so small. He followed me everywhere, wanted to help with everything. I can carry that, Papa. I can do it. He thought he was so grown up. Silence fell heavy in the cabin. The fire started in the middle of the night, Ethan continued. I don't know how. I woke up choking on smoke and the whole house was already burning. I tried to get to them, tried to reach the children's room, but the ceiling collapsed and he stopped, lifted his hands and turned them over, showing Clara the scars that covered his palms and fingers. I couldn't save them. I tried, but I couldn't. Clara reached across the table without thinking and took his scarred hands in hers. They were warm from the fire, calloused from years of hard work. It wasn't your fault, she said. Everyone else thinks it was. Everyone else is wrong. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, like he was trying to understand how she could be so certain. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Clara's grip tightened. Because I've seen how grief destroys people. Real grief, the kind you can't fake. It's in everything you do. The way you move, the way you barely eat, the way you stop taking care of this cabin. That's not guilt. That's someone who lost everything and doesn't know how to keep living. Tears tracked down Ethan's face, silent and unexpected. He didn't wipe them away, just sat there letting them fall while Clara held his hands and refused to look away. They were my whole world, he whispered, and when they died, the world ended. I just haven't figured out how to stop existing in it yet. Then maybe, Clara said softly, we figure that out together. Ethan pulled his hands back, embarrassed by his tears. He wiped his face roughly. I shouldn't have told you all that. Why not? Because now you're stuck here with a man who's been broken so badly he might never be whole again. Clara stood and moved to the fire, warming her hands. Everyone's broken by something, Ethan. Every single person walking around carries damage they're trying to survive. You're not special in that. You're just more honest about it than most. She turned to face him. I'm broken too. My father drank himself to death after my mother died. I watched him destroy himself one bottle at a time, and I couldn't stop it. After he was gone, I had nothing. No family, no money, no prospects. I took work in a boarding house in Denver, and the owner's son thought that meant I was available for other services. Clara's voice hardened. I ran. Got on a stagecoach heading anywhere that wasn't there. Saw an advertisement for a teaching position in Cedar Ridge, and thought maybe, finally, I could start over somewhere nobody knew me. Somewhere I could be more than just a woman with nowhere else to go. And then you married a murderer instead, Ethan said bitterly. I married a man who needed someone to believe in him, Clara corrected. That's not the same thing. They stared at each other across the firelight, two damaged people who'd collided by accident and somehow decided to stop falling alone. I don't know if I can be what you need, Ethan said quietly. I don't know if I can either, but we can try. That night, Clara climbed to the loft and lay in the narrow bed, listening to Ethan move around downstairs. She heard him bank the fire. Heard him settle onto what must have been a pallet near the hearth. Heard him, after a long silence, crying so quietly she almost missed it. And Clara stared at the rough wooden ceiling and wondered what she'd actually gotten herself into. Because Ethan Cole wasn't just a man falsely accused. He was a man who'd been systematically destroyed by grief and isolation and a town that had decided he was guilty long before he'd had any chance to defend himself. And Silas Garrett, whoever he was, whatever power he held, had been the architect of that destruction. The question that kept Clara awake was, why? What could possibly be worth destroying an innocent man so completely? She fell asleep without finding an answer, and dreamed of fire and rope and voices in the darkness, circling, never letting her rest. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Clara woke before dawn each morning to restart the fire Ethan had banked the night before. He'd already be outside by then, checking the perimeter, she realized, looking for signs that Garrett's men had come during the night. Sometimes she'd find boot prints in the soft earth near the tree line, sometimes broken branches, small signs that they were being watched. Neither of them mentioned it directly. On the third morning, Clara decided to tackle the garden. The plot behind the cabin was bigger than she'd thought, maybe 30 feet square, but it had gone to seed years ago. Dead vines choked what had once been raised beds. Weeds pushed up through rotted boards. A broken fence leaned at angles like drunken soldiers. She found tools in a shed, a rusted shovel, a hoe with a cracked handle, gardening gloves that had been chewed by mice. Not much, but enough. Ethan came around the corner of the cabin and stopped when he saw her kneeling in the dirt, pulling dead plants. What are you doing? What does it look like? Clara yanked up a handful of dried thistle. I'm clearing this garden. Why? Because we need vegetables, and because it gives me something to do besides sit inside waiting for men with guns to show up. Ethan stood there for a long moment just watching her work. Then without saying anything, he went to the shed and came back with another shovel. They worked side by side for hours. The silence between them was different now. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. Clara would glance over occasionally and see Ethan digging with that same mechanical efficiency he brought to splitting wood. Like his body knew how to work even when his mind was somewhere else. By midday, they'd cleared half the garden. Clara's hands were covered in blisters despite the gloves. Her back ached. But looking at the clean soil, at the space they'd reclaimed from neglect, she felt something that might have been satisfaction. Sarah loved this garden, Ethan said suddenly. Clara paused, her shovel mid-thrust. She'd spend hours out here, said it was the only place she could think clearly. Ethan's voice was distant, remembering. Emma would help her plant seeds. Thomas would dig holes, usually in the wrong places, but Sarah never corrected him. She said enthusiasm mattered more than accuracy. Clara carefully pulled another weed. What did she grow? Everything. Tomatoes, beans, squash, lettuce, herbs I can't even name. She had a whole section just for flowers. Ethan pointed to the far corner. Over there. She said a garden needed beauty as much as it needed food. She sounds like someone I would have liked. Everyone liked Sarah. There was no bitterness in his words, just fact. That's what made it worse after the fire. People believed I'd killed her because they couldn't imagine anyone actually wanting to. So they decided I must be a monster who'd hidden his true nature. It was easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen. Clara stuck her shovel in the ground and sat back on her heels. Ethan, can I ask you something? Probably going to anyway. The night of the fire, you said you woke up and the house was already burning. But how did it start? Do you remember anything before that? Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, like he was walking through a memory full of broken glass. I'd been working late, fixing the roof on the barn. Sarah brought me dinner around sunset, and we sat outside eating while the kids played. Everything was normal, completely normal. He paused. Sarah went to put the children to bed around 8. I finished the barn work and came inside maybe an hour later. We talked for a few minutes, then went to bed. And then I woke up choking. The room was full of smoke. I could hear the fire in the walls spreading faster than should have been possible. I tried to wake Sarah, but his hands clenched around the shovel handle. She'd already breathed in too much smoke. I got her outside, but she never woke up, died 3 days later without ever opening her eyes. Claire's chest tightened. And the children? I went back for them. The hallway was burning. Part of the ceiling had already collapsed. I could hear Emma screaming for me, and I tried. His voice broke. I tried so hard to reach them, but the floor gave way, and I fell into the cellar. By the time I got back up, the whole second floor was gone. The silence that followed was heavy with grief so old it had calcified into something harder than bone. The fire inspector said it started in the kitchen, Ethan continued mechanically. In the stove. Said Sarah must have left embers burning too hot when she banked the fire for the night. But Sarah never made mistakes like that. She was careful, always careful. So you don't think it was an accident? I don't know what I think anymore. Ethan threw down his shovel. I've gone over that night 1,000 times, and it never makes sense. The fire spread too fast, burned too hot, and Silas Garrett somehow knew about it before anyone else in town. He showed up at the ruins the next morning already convinced I'd done it on purpose. How did he know to come? That's the question, isn't it? Ethan's laugh was bitter. His brother Marcus supposedly saw the fire from his place 3 miles away. But Marcus lived on the other side of the valley. There's no way he could have seen smoke in the middle of the night from that distance. Clara stood slowly, her mind working. So Marcus Garrett lied about seeing the fire. Or he was already there when it started. The implication hung between them like poison. Are you saying Marcus Garrett might have set the fire? Clara asked carefully. I'm saying I don't know. But Marcus disappeared right after the investigation. Left town owing money all over Cedar Ridge. And Silas was so quick to blame me that he never even considered his own brother might have been involved. Or he did consider it, Clara said slowly, and decided it was easier to destroy you than admit his brother was a killer. Ethan stared at her. That's a hell of an accusation. Is it? You said yourself Silas has been trying to drive you off this mountain for 6 years. Men don't hold grudges that long unless they're protecting something. Before Ethan could respond, a voice called out from the trees, Cole! I know you're out here. They both spun toward the sound. 3 riders emerged from the forest, moving slowly toward the cabin. Clara recognized the stance immediately. Men who were used to intimidating people. Ethan grabbed Clara's arm. Get inside. No. Clara, I said no. She pulled free and stood her ground. You don't face them alone anymore. The riders stopped about 20 feet away. The man in front was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and his father's cruel mouth. The family resemblance was unmistakable. Thomas Garrett, Ethan said flatly. That's right. Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My father sent me with a message. You've got 1 week to pack up and leave this mountain. After that, we're coming back to burn this cabin to the ground. Your father doesn't own this land, Clara said before Ethan could speak. Thomas turned his attention to her for the first time. His smile widened. You must be the woman desperate enough to marry this murderer. My father told me you were stupid. Guess he was right. Watch your mouth, Ethan said quietly, but there was steel underneath. Or what? Thomas laughed. You'll kill me too? Add me to the list with your wife and kids? Ethan moved forward, but Clara stepped in front of him. She looked directly at Thomas, refusing to show fear even though her heart was pounding. Let me tell you something about your father, she said, her voice cutting through the clearing. He's so desperate to drive Ethan away that he sends his son to do his dirty work. That's not strength, that's cowardice. Thomas's smile vanished. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Your father accused Ethan of murder without proof. He spent 6 years trying to destroy a man who never had a trial, and now he's threatening to burn down a cabin just to get his way. Clara took a step forward. That sounds like a man who's terrified of something. What is he so afraid of, Thomas? He's not afraid of anything. Then why does he care so much about driving Ethan off this mountain? Why does it matter where Ethan lives? Thomas's jaw tightened. Because he's a killer who doesn't deserve. If you really believed that, you'd have had him arrested properly. But your father never pushed for a trial, did he? Just whispers and accusations. Why? For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Thomas's face. Then it was gone, replaced by anger. You've got 1 week. Tell Cole to take it seriously. He wheeled his horse around, and the 3 riders disappeared back into the trees. Clara stood there shaking, only now realizing how terrified she'd actually been. Ethan came up beside her, his face unreadable. That was stupid, he said. Probably. You could have gotten hurt. So could you. Ethan looked at her like he was seeing someone completely different from the woman who'd arrived a week ago. Why did you do that? Because I'm tired of watching bullies get their way. Clara's hands were still trembling. And because you were right. Silas Garrett is afraid of something. I saw it in his son's face just now. Whatever happened 6 years ago, it wasn't what everyone thinks. Even if you're right, it doesn't matter. Garrett owns half the valley. He's got money, men, influence. We have nothing. We have the truth. Or we will, once we figure out what it is. Ethan shook his head, but Clara saw something shift in his expression. Not quite hope. More like the memory of what hope used to feel like. They went back to the garden and worked until sunset, neither of them speaking much. But the silence felt different now. Less lonely. Like they were building something together, even if neither of them could name what it was. That night, Clara found an old photograph while cleaning. It had fallen behind a shelf, probably knocked there years ago, and forgotten. She picked it up carefully. 4 people stared back at her. Ethan, younger and smiling in a way Clara couldn't imagine. A dark-haired woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Sarah. A little girl, maybe 6, with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. Emma. And a small boy, probably 4, leaning against his father's leg with absolute trust. Thomas. Clara's throat tightened. These weren't just names anymore. They were real people who'd laughed and played and loved each other. A family that had been destroyed in one terrible night. She heard Ethan come inside and quickly tried to put the photo back, but it was too late. He'd already seen what she was holding. I'm sorry, Clara said quickly. I didn't mean to. It's fine. Ethan crossed the room and took the photograph from her hands. He stared at it for a long time, his face carefully blank. This was taken about a month before the fire. Sarah's brother came to visit. He had one of those new cameras. They look happy. We were. Ethan's voice was barely audible. That's what I can't forgive myself for. I was happy, completely happy. And I didn't know that in 4 weeks everything would be gone. Clara wanted to say something comforting, but what comfort was there for that kind of loss? Can I tell you something terrible? Ethan asked suddenly. Okay. Sometimes I forget what they look like. I'll be working and I'll try to remember Sarah's face, and it's like looking through fog. I can't see her clearly anymore. And that feels worse than anything else. Like I'm killing them all over again by forgetting. You're not forgetting, Clara said gently. You're just human. Memory doesn't work the way we want it to. It fades whether we want it to or not. It shouldn't. I should remember every detail, every moment. Why? So you can torture yourself more efficiently? Ethan flinched like she'd slapped him. Clara immediately regretted her harsh words, but she pressed forward anyway. Ethan, you've been punishing yourself for 6 years for something you didn't do. You've isolated yourself up here, barely surviving, because you think that's what you deserve, but they wouldn't have wanted that. You don't know what they would have wanted. Yes, I do, because Sarah loved you enough to marry you and have children with you. And from everything you've said, she was kind, generous, happy. Clara moved closer. Do you really think a woman like that would want you to spend the rest of your life in misery because you survived and she didn't? Ethan's hands clenched around the photograph. I should have saved them. You tried. You have the scars to prove it. But you can't save people from fires that burn too fast and too hot. You can only survive and decide what to do with the life you have left. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, Clara admitted, but maybe we figure it out together. Ethan carefully set the photograph on the mantel above the fireplace. Face up, where he could see it. That simple act felt more significant than anything else that had happened between them. I haven't looked at that picture in 3 years, he said quietly. It hurt too much. Does it still hurt? Yes, but maybe... He paused. Maybe it's supposed to hurt. Maybe that's how I know they were real, that they mattered. Clara didn't respond, just stood beside him while they both looked at the family that used to exist. The next morning, Clara woke to find Ethan already in the garden. He'd built a new frame for the raised beds overnight, proper lumber, carefully measured and joined. When she came outside, he looked up almost sheepishly. Figured if we're going to do this, might as well do it right. Clara smiled. It was the first time she'd seen him take initiative for something beyond basic survival. They worked together all morning, building beds, mixing soil, planning where different vegetables would go. Ethan remembered what Sarah had planted and where. He showed Clara which spots got the most sun, which stayed damp, which dried out too fast. She knew all this by instinct, he said. I had to write it down. Nothing wrong with that. By afternoon, they had 4 raised beds ready for planting. It was too early in the season for most vegetables, but they could start with cold weather crops. Lettuce, spinach, peas. Clara stood back, surveying their work. We need seeds. There's a general store in Cedar Ridge. You think they'd sell to you? Ethan's face darkened. No, but they might sell to you. Clara understood what he was saying. She'd have to go to town alone, face the people who'd wanted to hang her husband. Pretend like everything was fine while they whispered about her behind her back. Okay, she said. I'll go tomorrow. Clara, you don't have to. Yes, I do. We need supplies, and I need to understand what we're actually dealing with in that town. The next morning, Ethan hitched the wagon before dawn. He gave Clara money and a list of supplies, his face tight with worry. If anyone gives you trouble, I'll handle it. Silas Garrett, I can handle him too. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara was already climbing onto the wagon seat. She took the reins and looked down at him. I'll be back before dark. Be careful. Always am. That was a lie, and they both knew it. The ride down the mountain took 2 hours. Clara used the time to prepare herself for whatever she'd face. Hostile stares. Whispered insults. Maybe worse. But she'd survived worse before. She could do it again. Cedar Ridge looked different in daylight, smaller than she remembered. Just one main street with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church. Maybe 30 buildings total, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Clara tied the wagon outside the general store and went inside. The shopkeeper was a man in his 50s with a suspicious face. He looked up when she entered, and his expression immediately soured. We don't serve his kind here. His kind? Clara kept her voice pleasant. I'm here to buy supplies. Money's good, regardless of who it comes from. That murderer's money isn't welcome in my store. Clara set the list on the counter. Ethan Cole has never been convicted of anything, and last I checked, refusing service based on accusations rather than facts is bad business. Bad business is associating with killers. Then I guess you don't want these $20. Clara pulled out the money Ethan had given her and set it beside the list. Your choice. The shopkeeper stared at the money. $20 was a significant amount, especially in a small town. Clara watched him calculate. Principal versus profit. Profit won. Fine, he said grudgingly, but I want you out of here quick. While the shopkeeper gathered supplies, Clara became aware of other people entering the store. Women, mostly, coming into shop and stopping short when they saw her. The whispers started immediately. That's her. The one who married him. What kind of woman? Clara kept her eyes forward, refusing to react. She'd learned young that showing fear only made things worse. A woman about Clara's age approached. She had kind eyes and an uncertain smile. You're Clara Cole? That's right. I'm Margaret Hollins. I wanted to say I think what you did was brave. The shopkeeper snorted, but Margaret ignored him. Not everyone in Cedar Ridge agrees with what happened. Some of us think maybe we were too quick to judge. Some of you waited 6 years to have that thought, Clara said, her voice sharper than intended. Margaret flinched, but didn't back down. You're right, and I'm ashamed of that. But if there's anything I can do to help, you can tell people the truth. That Ethan Cole was never given a fair trial. That he's been living in isolation for 6 years based on nothing but rumors. It's not that simple. Silas Garrett controls this town, I know. Clara met Margaret's eyes. But he's just one man, and one man shouldn't have the power to destroy someone's life without evidence. The store had gone silent. Everyone was listening now. Margaret looked around nervously, then leaned closer. Be careful. Garrett doesn't like being challenged, and his son Thomas is worse, more reckless. I met Thomas yesterday. Then you know. They'll come after you if you keep defending Ethan. Let them try. Margaret studied her for a long moment. You really care about him, don't you? Clara wasn't sure how to answer that. She barely knew Ethan, but she'd seen his grief, his isolation, his careful attempts to survive each day, and she'd chosen to stand beside him when no one else would. I care about justice, she said finally. The shopkeeper finished loading supplies and practically threw them at Clara. She paid, loaded everything into the wagon, and was about to leave when she saw a man watching from across the street. Tall, gray hair, expensive clothes. He stood in front of a building marked Garrett Ranch Office, with his arms crossed, staring at her with cold calculation. Silas Garrett. Clara held his gaze for 3 long seconds, refusing to look away first. Then she climbed onto the wagon and started back up the mountain. She'd barely cleared the town limits when a rider caught up with her. Young, blonde, wearing a deputy's badge. Ma'am, I need you to stop. Clara pulled the wagon to a halt. Is there a problem? The deputy looked uncomfortable. Sheriff wants to talk to you about Ethan Cole. Does the sheriff have a warrant? No, ma'am. He just wants to talk. Clara considered refusing, but curiosity won. Fine. Lead the way. The sheriff's office was small and cluttered. The man behind the desk was older than Clara expected, maybe 60, with tired eyes and hands that shook slightly. He stood when she entered. Mrs. Cole, thank you for coming. I'm Sheriff Tom Warren. I remember you. From the day I arrived. Warren had the grace to look ashamed. That wasn't my finest moment. I should have stopped them from even considering. He broke off. Can I offer you coffee? No, thank you. What did you want to talk about? Warren gestured to a chair, but Clara remained standing. He sighed and sat back down. I wanted to warn you. Silas Garrett is planning something. I don't know what, but he's been meeting with his men more frequently. And after Ethan defended himself against Thomas yesterday, things escalated. Ethan didn't defend himself, I did. Even worse, from Garrett's perspective, he doesn't like being challenged, especially not by women. That's his problem, not mine. Warren rubbed his face. Mrs. Cole, I'm trying to help you. Garrett has resources, men, influence. If he decides to move against Ethan, I won't be able to stop him. Then do your job and arrest him for threatening us. On what evidence? He hasn't actually done anything yet. He sent his son to threaten to burn down our cabin. Do you have witnesses? Anyone besides you and Ethan who heard Thomas say that? Clara's jaw tightened. No. Then it's your word against his. And in this town, Garrett's word carries more weight. Warren leaned forward. I know it's not fair. I know the whole situation stinks. But I'm one man with a badge that doesn't mean much when the richest rancher in the valley decides he wants something. You could have stopped the hanging. I tried. You saw me try. Not hard enough. Warren flinched. You're right, I didn't. I let the crowd intimidate me, and an innocent man almost died because of it. I have to live with that. He stood, his tired eyes meeting hers. But I'm trying to do better now, so please, be careful. Watch your back. And if Garrett makes a move, come find me immediately. Clara left without responding. She climbed back onto the wagon and drove out of town, her mind churning. Warren seemed genuine in his regret. But regret didn't change what had happened. Didn't give Ethan back those 6 years. Didn't stop Garrett from continuing to threaten them. The ride back up the mountain felt longer than the ride down. By the time Clara reached the cabin, the sun was low and shadows stretched long across the clearing. Ethan was splitting wood, but he dropped the axe when he saw her and crossed the distance quickly. "Everything okay?" "Fine. Got the supplies." "Any trouble?" Clara climbed down from the wagon. "Some. The shopkeeper didn't want to serve me. A few women whispered. Nothing I couldn't handle." "Clara. And I met Silas Garrett." She started unloading supplies. "Didn't talk to him, just saw him watching. He wanted me to know he was paying attention." Ethan's face went hard. "I knew I shouldn't have let you go alone. You didn't let me do anything. I chose to go." Clara handed him a sack of flour. "But the sheriff wanted to talk. He warned me that Garrett's planning something." "Of course he is." They carried the supplies inside and spent the next hour putting everything away. Clara noticed Ethan moving around the cabin differently now, more purposefully. Like he was starting to remember this was his home instead of just a place he existed. That night they ate dinner together. Real food. Fresh bread Clara had bought in town. Cheese. Dried apples. Ethan ate slowly, like he was relearning what it meant to taste things. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for going to town, for dealing with all of them. You don't need to thank me every time I do something." "Yes, I do, because you keep doing things you don't have to do." Clara set down her fork. "Ethan, we're married. I know it wasn't traditional, and I know neither of us planned this, but we're in this together now. You don't have to keep acting surprised when I actually behave like your wife." "I don't know how to let someone help me anymore." "Then learn." The words came out harsher than she intended, but Ethan didn't look offended, just thoughtful. "My brother used to say I was too proud, that I'd rather suffer alone than ask for help." He smiled slightly, but it was sad. Guess he was right. "Where's your brother now?" "Dead. Fever took him 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring anyone back." They finished eating in silence. Clara washed the dishes while Ethan fed the fire, and the domestic routine felt both strange and comfortable. Later, after Clara had climbed to the loft, she heard Ethan moving around downstairs, heard him pause by the mantel where the family photograph now sat, heard what might have been him crying quietly, or maybe just the wind outside. She lay in the darkness thinking about everything she'd seen in town. The way people had looked at her, some with pity, some with judgment, some with calculation. The way Silas Garrett had watched her, cold and assessing. The way Sheriff Warren had seemed genuinely troubled but ultimately powerless. This was bigger than one false accusation. There was something underneath, something nobody was saying out loud. And Clara was determined to figure out what it was. Because she'd meant what she told Thomas Garrett. His father was afraid of something. And whatever it was worth destroying an innocent man to keep hidden. Clara closed her eyes and made a decision. She wouldn't just survive on this mountain with Ethan. She'd find the truth, even if it put her in danger, even if the whole town turned against her. She'd chosen this fight when she stepped in front of that mob. Now she'd see it through to the end, whatever that meant. The smell hit Clara first, smoke, thick and acrid, seeping through the cracks in the loft walls. She jolted awake, her heart already racing before her mind fully caught up. Dawn light filtered gray through the small window, and for a confused moment she thought maybe Ethan had just built the fire up too high. Then she heard him shouting from outside. Clara scrambled down the ladder, her bare feet hitting the cold floor hard. She grabbed her shawl and ran to the door, throwing it open. The eastern ridge was burning. Massive columns of smoke rose into the morning sky, black and churning. Even from the cabin, she could see orange flames racing through the dry grass and scrub pine, pushed by wind that seemed to be feeding the fire rather than containing it. Ethan stood in the yard with his hands on his head, staring at the inferno. "It's heading toward the valley." Clara moved beside him. "How did it start?" "Lightning, maybe, or someone's campfire. Doesn't matter now." Ethan's voice was tight with something Clara couldn't identify at first. Then she realized it was fear. Raw and immediate. "That fire's going to reach Garrett's ranch before noon." "Good," Clara said before she could stop herself. "Let it burn." Ethan turned to look at her, and his expression made her take a step back. "You don't mean that." "Why not, after everything he's done to you? Because fire doesn't care who deserves what. Ethan was already moving toward the shed. It burns everything. Animals, crops, people who had nothing to do with any of this. Ethan, wait! But he was already loading tools into the wagon, a shovel, an axe, buckets. His movements were frantic but precise, like muscle memory taking over. Clara grabbed his arm. You can't be serious. You want to help the man who's been trying to kill you? I want to stop a fire before it destroys the entire valley. Ethan pulled free and kept loading. You don't have to come. Stay here where it's safe. Safe? That fire's heading this direction too eventually. Not for hours, maybe days. But Garrett's ranch... He stopped, swallowing hard. I know what it sounds like when children burn. I'm not letting that happen to anyone else, not even Garrett's son. The words hit Clara like cold water. She stood there for a moment watching Ethan work with that desperate efficiency, and understood. This wasn't about forgiveness or justice or any of the complicated emotions between him and Silas Garrett. This was about a man who'd failed to save his own family and would die before he let it happen again. Then I'm coming with you, Clara said. Clara, I said I'm coming. She ran back inside and pulled on her boots, grabbed a scarf to cover her mouth and nose. When she came back out, Ethan was already in the wagon seat. They didn't speak during the ride down the mountain. The smoke grew thicker as they descended, stinging Clara's eyes and throat. She could hear the fire now, a distant roar like some massive animal consuming everything in its path. The valley opened up below them, and Clara saw the full scale of the disaster. The fire had already crossed the eastern ridge and was racing toward Garrett Ranch at terrifying speed. She could see tiny figures moving near the ranch buildings, people shouting and running, horses screaming in panic. Ethan pushed the wagon faster, navigating the rough trail with reckless speed. They hit the valley floor and drove straight toward the chaos. Silas Garrett stood in the middle of his ranch yard, bellowing orders that nobody seemed to be following. Men ran in different directions, some trying to move livestock, others hauling water buckets that were laughably inadequate for the approaching inferno. Garrett saw them coming and his face went purple with rage. Get off my property! Ethan didn't even slow down. He drove the wagon past Garrett toward the barn and jumped down, already assessing the situation with the kind of focus Clara had never seen in him before. You need fire breaks, Ethan shouted over the noise. Trenches between the ranch and the fire line. Now! I don't take orders from you, Garrett snarled. Then enjoy watching everything burn. Ethan grabbed a shovel from the wagon. Clara, start hauling water to wet down the barn roof. Everyone else. Don't you dare listen to him! Garrett stepped forward, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. At that moment, the eastern fence line exploded into flames. The fire had jumped the creek and was now less than 100 yards from the barn. Everything changed. The ranch hands stopped looking to Garrett for orders and started looking to Ethan, the man who knew fire intimately, the man who'd survived it once and carried the scars to prove it. Trenches, Ethan shouted, 3 feet deep, 20 feet out from the barn. Move! The men moved. Even Garrett stood frozen, watching his workers obey a man he'd spent 6 years destroying. Clara grabbed buckets and ran toward the well. The ranch hands were digging frantically now, throwing up dirt as fast as they could. Ethan directed them, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. Deeper on the windward side. Johnson, get those horses out of the corral. Someone wet down that hay pile before the embers reach it. The fire kept coming. Clara hauled water until her arms screamed, dumping bucket after bucket onto the barn roof. The heat was incredible even at this distance. Smoke made breathing nearly impossible. Her eyes streamed tears that had nothing to do with emotion. Ethan worked like a man possessed. He dug trenches alongside the ranch hands, his scarred hands bleeding as he threw shovel after shovel of dirt. When sparks started landing in the dry grass between the fire break and the barn, he ran along beating them out with a wet blanket. Thomas Garrett appeared beside Clara, his face black with soot. The barn roof. There's fire on it. Clara looked up and saw flames licking along the far edge. If it reached the hay stored inside, the whole structure would explode. Ethan saw it too. Without hesitation, he grabbed a ladder and started climbing. What are you doing? Clara screamed. He didn't answer, just kept climbing until he reached the roof and started beating at the flames with his jacket. Sparks swirled around him. The heat had to be unbearable. But he didn't stop. Clara filled more buckets, her hands shaking. Thomas helped her carry them to the base of the ladder. Get them up here, Ethan shouted down. Thomas climbed the ladder with buckets in each hand. Together, he and Ethan dumped water on the spreading flames. Clara kept hauling more, her world narrowing to this single task. Fill the bucket, carry it, send it up the ladder. Repeat. The fire line reached the trench. For a moment, Clara thought they'd failed. Flames leaped across the gap, igniting grass on the ranch side. But the trench had slowed it down just enough. The ranch hands beat out the new fires before they could spread. Slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The firebreak held. The barn stopped burning. And the main fire, having consumed all the available fuel, began to die down as it hit areas that had already been cleared. Clara collapsed against the well, her legs giving out. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Her lungs felt scorched. But the ranch still stood. Ethan climbed down from the roof, his face covered in soot and burns, his clothes singed. He looked like he might collapse any second, but he stayed upright through sheer will. Silas Garrett walked toward him through the smoke and ash. The old rancher's face was unreadable. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other while everyone else watched. Then Garrett's shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly old, all the fire drained out of him. "You saved it," Garrett said, his voice barely audible. "You saved my ranch." Ethan didn't respond, just stood there swaying slightly. "Why?" Garrett asked. "After everything I've done to you, why would you save anything of mine?" "Because Thomas is 11 years old and doesn't deserve to burn," Ethan said flatly. "And because I know what fire sounds like when it's killing people. I won't live through that again. Not even for you." Garrett flinched like he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I owe you. You don't owe me anything." Ethan turned away. "Just leave us alone." He walked toward the wagon where Clara waited. She stood on shaking legs and helped him climb up. Neither of them looked back as they drove away from the ranch. They were halfway back to the cabin before Ethan spoke. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For dragging you into that. You could have been killed." Clara laughed, and it came out half hysterical. "Ethan, I chose to come. Nobody dragged me anywhere. You shouldn't have to fight my battles. Maybe I'm fighting my own battles and you just happen to be there." Ethan glanced at her, confused and exhausted. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm tired of being the kind of person who stands aside while terrible things happen. I spent my whole life being invisible, being quiet, not making waves. And where did it get me?" Clara's voice rose. "My father drank himself to death while I watched. My mother faded away and I couldn't stop it. I ran from Denver because I was too afraid to fight back. Well, I'm done running. I'm done being invisible. And if that means hauling water while a wildfire tries to kill us all, then that's what it means." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "You're not invisible to me." The words were simple, but they hit Clara harder than anything else he could have said. She turned away, sudden tears mixing with the soot on her face. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting. Both of them were so exhausted they could barely stand. Clara heated water for washing, and they took turns cleaning off the worst of the smoke and ash. Ethan's hands were a mess, blisters on top of old scars, fresh burns from the roof. Clara made him sit while she wrapped them in clean cloth, her own hands shaking from exhaustion. "You shouldn't have climbed onto that roof," she said quietly. "Had to. You could have died. Wouldn't have been the first time I tried." Clara's hands stilled. She looked up at him and Ethan wouldn't meet her eyes. "After Sarah and the children died," he said slowly, "I spent a long time thinking about joining them. Spent nights standing at the edge of the cliff behind this cabin, trying to work up the courage to step off. But I was too much of a coward. Couldn't even do that right. Ethan, I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because you deserve to know who you married. A man who's been so broken, he forgot why living matters." He finally looked at her. "Until you showed up." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm not some miracle cure." "No. But you're someone who sees me as human, and I'd forgotten what that felt like." They sat in silence while the fire crackled and night pressed in around the cabin. Clara finished wrapping Ethan's hands, her touch gentle on his damaged skin. "We should eat something," she said finally. "Not hungry." "Too bad. You're eating anyway." She heated soup, simple, just broth and vegetables, and made Ethan consume at least half a bowl. He obeyed mechanically, like a child being told what to do. Later, when Clara climbed to the loft, she heard Ethan moving around downstairs, heard him pause by the photograph on the mantel, heard him whisper something too quiet to make out. She lay in the darkness, her body aching in ways she'd never experienced, and thought about what had happened today. They'd saved Garrett's ranch, saved his family, and Ethan had done it not because he was forgiving or noble, but because he couldn't bear to hear children burning. That kind of trauma didn't just heal. It lived inside a person forever, changing how they saw the world. But maybe, Clara thought, as sleep finally took her, maybe having someone to share the weight made it bearable. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was in the garden when she heard horses approaching. Her first instinct was fear. Garrett's men coming back for revenge. But when the riders emerged from the trees, she saw Sheriff Warren in front, and behind him, Silas Garrett himself. Clara ran to the cabin. "Ethan!" He came outside with his rifle, but lowered it when he saw who it was. "What do you want, Garrett?" The old rancher climbed down from his horse slowly, like every movement hurt. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. When he spoke, his voice was rough with smoke damage. "I came to talk. Just talk. We said everything that needed saying yesterday." "No, we didn't." Garrett took a few steps forward, then stopped when Ethan raised the rifle again. "I came to tell you the truth. About the fire. About my brother. About all of it." Clara moved to stand beside Ethan. "We're listening." Garrett glanced at Sheriff Warren, who nodded encouragement. Then the old rancher took a deep breath and started talking. 6 years ago, my brother Marcus came to me with a problem. He owed money, a lot of money, gambling debts to some dangerous people in Denver. He asked me for help, but I refused, told him he'd made his own mess and needed to clean it up himself. Garrett's voice cracked. 2 days later, your house burned, Cole." Ethan went very still. "Marcus showed up at my ranch that night, covered in smoke, panicking, saying there'd been an accident. He'd gone to your property to steal. He thought maybe you kept cash in the house. But he knocked over a lamp, and the fire spread faster than he expected. By the time he realized people were inside, it was too late." The words fell into the clearing like stones into deep water. Clara felt Ethan trembling beside her. "He killed them," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "Your brother murdered my family for money I didn't even have." "It was an accident," Garrett said, but the words sounded weak even to him. He didn't mean to burn my wife and children alive?" Ethan's voice rose. "He didn't mean to destroy my entire life?" "No, and I didn't mean to destroy what was left." Garrett looked at the ground. "But I did, because when Marcus came to me that night, I made a choice. I could turn him in, watch my brother hang for killing innocents, or I could protect him, protect my family name. So I started the rumor that you'd set the fire yourself, made sure everyone believed it before you could defend yourself. You let me take the blame for what your brother did." "Yes." Garrett finally looked up and his eyes were wet. "I told myself you'd be fine, that you could start over somewhere else. But then you stayed up here on this mountain for 6 years, and every time I saw you, I had to face what I'd done. So I tried to drive you away, tried to make you leave so I wouldn't have to look at the man whose life I'd destroyed." Sheriff Warren spoke up. "Marcus disappeared 3 months after the fire, left the territory owing even more money than before. He's probably dead by now. Men like that don't last long on the run." "He should have hanged," Ethan said flatly. "Yes," Garrett agreed. "He should have. And so should I, for covering it up." Silence stretched between them. Claire could feel Ethan shaking, could see his knuckles white on the rifle. She wanted to say something, but this moment didn't belong to her. "Yesterday," Garrett continued quietly, "I watched you risk your life to save my ranch, save my son. After everything I'd done to you, and I realized I've been living with a coward's guilt for 6 years, trying to bury the truth instead of facing it." "So what now?" Ethan asked. "You confess and everything's fine? My family comes back?" "No. Nothing I do will ever make this right." Garrett reached into his coat pocket slowly, carefully. He pulled out a folded document. "But I can start. This is the deed to the land Marcus stole from you, the property where your house burned. It's yours. Always should have been. And I've signed a statement confessing everything. Sheriff Warren has a copy." He held out the papers. Ethan didn't take them. "I don't want your land." "It's not my land. It's yours. It was purchased in your wife's family name 40 years ago." Garrett's hand shook. "Please, let me do this one thing right." Ethan stared at the papers for a long moment. Then he lowered the rifle and took them. Garrett visibly sagged with relief. "I know you hate me. You have every right. But Thomas wanted you to know. He'll never forget what you did yesterday. Neither will I. I didn't do it for you. I know, that's what makes it matter. Garrett turned back to his horse, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But I'm sorry. He mounted and rode away with Warren following. Clara and Ethan stood in the clearing, watching them disappear into the trees. Ethan unfolded the papers with shaking hands. Clara read over his shoulder, official documents transferring ownership of a property in the valley, the place where Ethan's first family had died. He's trying to buy forgiveness, Ethan said. Maybe. Or maybe he's just trying to live with himself. It doesn't change anything, doesn't it? Clara looked at him. He confessed. You have proof now. The whole town will know you were innocent. The whole town should have believed me 6 years ago. Ethan crumpled the papers in his fist. This doesn't give me back my wife, my children, the 6 years I spent hiding up here like an animal. No. But it gives you a future. One where you're not the man everyone thinks is a killer. Ethan turned away, his shoulders shaking. Clara stood behind him, not touching, just present. After a moment, he spoke so quietly she almost missed it. I don't know if I can forgive him. Then don't. Not today. Maybe not ever. But you can decide what to do with this chance he's giving you. Ethan looked down at the crumpled papers. The land where they died. He wants me to have it back. Do you want it? I don't know. Part of me thinks I should burn it to the ground. Let it stay ruined. And the other part? Ethan was quiet for a long time. The other part thinks Sarah would have wanted something to grow there again. She always said death shouldn't be the end of everything. Clara moved beside him. Then maybe we plant something. Not now. Not until you're ready. But someday. We? I'm your wife, remember? Your problems are my problems. Ethan looked at her with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. You really mean that? I wouldn't have said it otherwise. He carefully unfolded the papers and smoothed them out. I never thanked you properly. For yesterday. For everything. You don't need to... Yes, I do. Ethan met her eyes. You saved my life twice now. Once from that mob and once from myself. I wouldn't have gone down to the valley yesterday if you hadn't insisted on coming, would have let it all burn and hated myself for it later. You would have gone eventually, that's who you are. Maybe, but you make it easier to remember why being that person matters. They stood together in the morning light, two damaged people learning to carry weight together instead of alone. The future was uncertain. Garrett's confession didn't erase 6 years of suffering, but it was something, a crack in the wall that had trapped Ethan in his grief. That night, Clara made a decision. She climbed down from the loft and found Ethan sitting by the fire, staring at the photograph of his family. Tell me about them, she said. He looked up, surprised. I already did. No. You told me how they died. Tell me how they lived. Ethan hesitated, then slowly started talking. He told her about Sarah's terrible singing voice that she insisted on using anyway, about Emma's collection of smooth river stones that she'd arranged in complicated patterns, about Thomas's habit of hiding in cabinets and jumping out to scare people. He talked for hours, and Clara listened. Listened to stories about birthday celebrations and winter storms and summer picnics. Listened to Ethan's voice grow stronger as he remembered life instead of death. Sarah used to make this stew, he said, almost smiling. It was awful. Absolutely terrible. But she was so proud of it that I ate every bite and pretended to love it. What was wrong with it? Everything. Too much salt. Not enough cooking time. Random vegetables that didn't belong together. Ethan's smile grew. One time Emma asked why Papa made such funny faces while eating, and Sarah finally tasted it herself. She spit it out immediately, and we all started laughing. We laughed so hard Thomas fell off his chair. Clara found herself smiling too. She sounds wonderful. She was. They all were. Ethan looked at the photograph with something other than pain for the first time. I've been so focused on how they died that I forgot how they lived. Forgot that they'd want me to remember the good things. It's easier to hold on to pain than joy. Pain feels like loyalty. Is that what you do? With your parents? Clara considered the question. I used to. Spent years angry at my father for choosing alcohol over me. Angry at my mother for giving up. But staying angry just made me bitter. Didn't bring them back. Didn't make anything better. So what did you do? I left. Started over. Tried to become someone they would have been proud of. even if they never got to see it. Clara paused. I'm still working on that last part. Ethan reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses and scars, but his grip was gentle. I think they would be proud. You're braver than you give yourself credit for. I'm not brave, I'm just tired of being afraid. That's the same thing. They sat together until the fire died down to embers. Then Ethan stood and did something unexpected. He took the photograph from the mantel and handed it to Clara. Keep this somewhere safe, he said. I need to remember they existed, but I also need to stop using their memory as an excuse to stop living. Clara took the photograph carefully. Are you sure? No, but I'm trying. That seemed like enough for now. The next few days brought changes Clara hadn't expected. Word of Garrett's confession spread through Cedar Ridge faster than the wildfire had spread through the valley. People started appearing at the cabin, tentatively at first, then more frequently. Margaret Hollins came with fresh bread and an apology. I should have spoken up years ago. We all should have. An older man named Fletcher brought tools and offered to help repair the cabin's sagging porch. My daughter died in a fire when she was young. I should have known better than to believe you'd do that to your own family. Even some of Garrett's ranch hands stopped by, offering work if Ethan needed it. You saved our livelihoods yesterday. We owe you. Ethan accepted the help but kept people at arm's length. 6 years of isolation had taught him not to trust easily. But Clara saw him slowly softening, slowly remembering how to be part of a community instead of apart from it. One afternoon, Sheriff Warren rode up with news. We found Marcus Garrett, or what's left of him, dead in a Denver boarding house, shot over gambling debts 3 years ago. Ethan received the information without visible emotion. Good. There'll be a formal hearing next month. Clear your name officially. But with Silas's confession, it's just a formality. After Warren left, Clara found Ethan in the garden, staring at the neat rows they'd planted together. It's really over, he said. The accusations, yes. Everything else, that takes longer. I keep waiting to feel something. Relief, anger, satisfaction. But I just feel empty. Clara knelt beside him and started weeding. Maybe empty is okay for now. Better than being filled with pain all the time. Is it, though? Yes, because empty can be filled with new things. Pain just sits there taking up space. Ethan picked up a trowel and joined her. They worked in comfortable silence until the sun started setting, painting the sky orange and red, colors that used to mean only destruction to Ethan, but now reminded him of endings that led to new beginnings. That night, lying in the loft, Clara heard Ethan laughing downstairs. Actually laughing at something he was reading. The sound was rusty and uncertain, like he'd forgotten how his own laughter sounded. But it was there. And for the first time since arriving in Cedar Ridge, Clara thought maybe, just maybe, they'd both found what they'd been searching for without knowing it. Not happiness, exactly, but the possibility of it. And sometimes possibility was enough. The hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in late spring, and Clara had never seen Ethan so tense. He'd barely slept the night before, pacing the cabin until she'd finally come downstairs and sat with him by the dying fire. What if they don't believe me? He'd asked in the darkness. They will. Garrett confessed. Warren has the statement. They didn't believe me 6 years ago. Why would now be different? Clara hadn't had a good answer for that, just held his scarred hand until sunrise came and they had to face whatever the day would bring. The courtroom was packed. Seemed like half of Cedar Ridge had shown up to watch Ethan Cole's name finally get cleared. Clara sat in the front row, her hands clenched in her lap, while Ethan stood before the judge, a gray-haired woman named Hartley, who'd ridden in from the county seat. Silas Garrett sat on the opposite side, looking smaller than Clara remembered. His son Thomas sat beside him, staring at his hands. Judge Hartley read through the document slowly, her face giving nothing away. Sheriff Warren testified about the investigation, about Marcus Garrett's disappearance, about the statement Silas had given. Then Silas himself stood and confirmed everything in a voice that shook. I let an innocent man suffer for 6 years to protect my brother, and in doing so, I became worse than he was. The judge asked Ethan if he had anything to say. He stood there for a long moment, and Clara could see him struggling with words that had been trapped inside for too long. I lost my family, he said finally. And then I lost 6 years of my life because this town decided I was guilty without ever asking for proof. I don't know if I can forgive that, but I'm tired of being angry. so I'll take whatever you're offering and try to figure out how to live with it. Judge Hartley nodded slowly. Mr. Cole, on behalf of this court and this community, I formally declare you innocent of all accusations related to the death of your family. The record will reflect that Marcus Garrett, now deceased, was responsible for the fire that killed Sarah Cole, Emma Cole, and Thomas Cole on the night of October 15th, 6 years ago. She paused, letting the words settle. Furthermore, I'm ordering the county to compensate you for wrongful accusation in the amount of $3,000. It's not enough. Nothing could be. But it's what I have the authority to grant. $3,000. Clara's breath caught. That was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. But Ethan just nodded like the number meant nothing. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Garrett, the judge turned to Silas, you've confessed to obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. Under normal circumstances, I'd send you to prison, but Mr. Cole has indicated he doesn't wish to press charges. So instead, I'm fining you $5,000 to be paid to Mr. Cole as additional compensation. Consider yourself lucky. Silas stood shakily. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll have the money by end of week. The gavel came down. Just like that, 6 years of accusation were erased. People in the courtroom started murmuring, some nodding with satisfaction, others looking uncomfortable, maybe remembering their own role in Ethan's suffering. Clara pushed through the crowd to reach him. Ethan stood frozen in place, like he couldn't quite believe it was over. You okay? She asked. I don't know. Am I supposed to feel different? There's no supposed to. You feel however you feel. Margaret Hollins approached, her eyes wet. Ethan, I'm so sorry. We all are. We should have... Don't, Ethan said quietly. Everyone's sorry now. But sorry doesn't give me back what I lost. Margaret flinched but nodded. You're right, it doesn't. But if there's anything we can do... There isn't. Ethan took Clara's hand. We're leaving. They walked out of the courthouse into bright sunlight that felt somehow wrong for such a heavy moment. People called out to Ethan, apologies, offers of help, invitations to dinner. He ignored all of them and headed straight for the wagon. Sheriff Warren caught up with them before they could leave. Cole, wait. Ethan turned, his face carefully blank. I know it doesn't mean much now, Warren said, but I'm sorry too. I should have done my job 6 years ago instead of letting Garrett intimidate me into looking the other way. You're right, Ethan said flatly. It doesn't mean much now. Warren absorbed the blow without flinching. Fair enough, but I wanted you to know, if you need anything going forward, you come to me. I'll make sure it gets handled properly. I won't need anything from Cedar Ridge going forward. They climbed into the wagon and drove out of town. Clara glanced back once and saw people still standing outside the courthouse, watching them leave. Some looked relieved, some looked ashamed. None of it seemed to matter much. Where do you want to go? Clara asked. Home. The cabin. Anywhere that isn't here. They rode in silence for a while. Then Ethan suddenly pulled the wagon to the side of the road and just sat there, his hands loose on the reins. I thought it would feel different, he said. Being declared innocent, getting justice. I thought I'd feel something, relief, vindication, anything. What do you feel? Empty. Like they took 6 years of my life and gave me back a piece of paper saying, our mistake. How is that justice? Clara didn't have an answer. She just moved closer and let her shoulder press against his. The money, though, she said after a while. $8,000 total, that's enough to start over, really start over. I don't want to start over. I want to go back and stop Marcus Garrett before he ever lit that fire. You can't. I know. Ethan's voice cracked, and that's what makes it unbearable. They sat on the side of the road for a long time, just being quiet together while the sun moved across the sky. Eventually, Ethan picked up the reins again, and they continued home. The cabin looked different somehow when they arrived. Not physically. It was the same structure they'd left that morning. But something had shifted. Maybe it was knowing they could leave if they wanted to, that they weren't trapped here by circumstance anymore. Over the next few days, people continued showing up with offerings. Food, tools, lumber, apologies. Ethan accepted the physical items, but rejected the apologies with a coldness that made Clara uncomfortable. You're being harsh, she said one evening after he'd turned away a man who'd ridden up with a handmade rocking chair. I'm being honest. You're being bitter. I have a right to be bitter. Ethan threw a log on the fire with more force than necessary. These people watched them drag me through the streets, watched them prepare to hang me, and they did nothing. Now they want me to forgive them because it turns out I was innocent? Not forgive, just don't push everyone away. Why not? They pushed me away first. Clara stood and faced him directly. Because if you let this bitterness consume you, then Marcus Garrett and his brother win. They don't just take 6 years of your life, they take the rest of it too. Maybe they already have. That's up to you. Clara's voice hardened. You can spend the rest of your life angry at people who were scared and stupid and let a powerful man manipulate them. Or you can decide what kind of future you want and actually build it. Easy for you to say. Nobody accused you of murdering your family. No. They just watched my father drink himself to death and my mother starve herself slowly, and nobody did anything to help. Everyone just looked the other way and pretended not to notice. Clara's hands clenched. So don't tell me I don't understand what it's like when people choose convenience over compassion. Ethan stared at her, then looked away. I'm sorry. That was Cowboy. Yes, ist true. And I'm not trying to diminish what happened to you. I'm trying to stop you from destroying what's left. Clara moved closer. You survived 6 years of hell. Don't let it make you into someone your family wouldn't recognize. The words hit harder than she'd intended. Ethan sank into a chair, his face in his hands. I don't know how to let it go, he whispered. You don't have to let it go. Just don't let it be the only thing you hold on to. That night, Ethan didn't come to bed. Clara heard him moving around downstairs for hours. When she finally climbed down the ladder, she found him sitting at the table with papers spread everywhere. The deed to the Valley property, the court documents, receipts and records from 6 years ago. What are you doing? Trying to figure out what to do with all this. Ethan gestured at the papers. I have money now, land, a cleared name, everything I thought I wanted 6 years ago. But I don't know what any of it means anymore. I was so focused on just surviving day to day that I never thought about what comes after. Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. What do you want to do? I don't know. Then start smaller. What do you want to do tomorrow? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I want to go look at the Valley property, the land where the house burned. Okay, then we'll do that. I haven't been there since the day after the fire. I couldn't bear to see it. You don't have to go alone anymore. Ethan looked at her with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. When I agreed to marry you, I thought I was just accepting help from a stranger who felt sorry for me. I didn't expect... He stopped. Didn't expect what? Didn't expect you to actually stay. To care. To fight for me when I'd stopped fighting for myself. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. You could have left a dozen times. Should have left. But you didn't. Where would I go? I like it here. On a mountain with a bitter man who barely knows how to be human anymore. You're learning, getting better at it every day. Ethan laughed, but it was sad. I'm terrible company. Yes, but I'm not exactly a prize either. We're two broken people trying to figure out how to be less broken. Seems fair to me. They sat together in the lamplight, holding hands across the table covered in documents that represented both everything Ethan had lost and everything he might still build. The next morning, they took the wagon down to the valley. The ride took almost 3 hours, winding through forest and across creeks swollen with snowmelt. Clara had never been to this part of the territory before. It was beautiful. Rolling hills, good soil, water access, the kind of land people fought over. The property sat in a clearing surrounded by old-growth pine. Clara saw the remains immediately, blackened timbers marking where walls had once stood, a stone chimney rising from the ruins like a tombstone, twisted metal that had once been a stove or bed frame. Ethan stopped the wagon well back from the site. He sat frozen, staring at what was left of his first life. I don't know if I can... His voice cut off. We can leave. Come back another day. No, I need to do this. He climbed down slowly and walked toward the ruins. Clara followed, giving him space but staying close enough to reach if he needed her. Ethan stopped at the edge of where the house had stood. Weeds had grown up through the ashes, small saplings pushed through gaps in the rubble. Nature was already reclaiming the space, burying the tragedy beneath new growth. They died right there, Ethan said, pointing to the far corner. The children's bedroom was in that corner. Sarah and I slept on the other side. I can still hear Emma screaming for me, still hear Thomas crying, still smell the smoke. Clara stood beside him silently. Sometimes I dream I save them. I get through the flames and reach them in time, and we all make it out. Ethan's voice was hollow. Then I wake up and remember the truth, that I failed, that they burned while I stood outside helpless. It wasn't your fault. Everyone keeps saying that. But if I'd been faster, stronger, smarter, you'd be dead too, and Sarah would have wanted you to live. Ethan turned to face her. How do you know what Sarah would have wanted? You never met her. Because I know what any person who loves someone wants. For them to survive. To keep going. To not destroy themselves with guilt over things they couldn't control. That's easy to say. No, it's not. It's the hardest thing in the world. Claire's voice rose. Do you think I don't carry guilt? I watched my father kill himself with alcohol and my mother starve herself to death, and I did nothing. I was too young, too scared, too helpless. And I've spent years wondering if I could have done something differently. But eventually you have to choose. Do you keep drowning in the guilt, or do you try to swim? Ethan stared at her, then looked back at the ruins. What if I don't know how to swim anymore? Then I'll help you remember. They stood together in the clearing where Ethan's family had died, surrounded by blackened timber and new growth. And Clara realized this was the moment that would define everything that came after. Either Ethan would let this place keep him trapped in the past, or he'd find a way to reclaim it. What would you build here? Clara asked quietly. If you could build anything. I don't... Ethan stopped, looked around at the good land, the water access, the possibilities. Sarah always wanted a bigger garden, and a barn for animals. She had this idea about raising sheep. Sheep? For the wool. She wanted to learn to spin yarn, weave cloth, make something useful. A faint smile crossed his face. I told her it was impractical, too much work. She said I had no imagination. She was right. Ethan actually laughed. It was small and broken, but real. Yes, she was. So build it. Not exactly what was here before. Something new. Something that honors them but doesn't try to recreate what's gone. With what money? $8,000 won't... He stopped. Actually, it might. If we do the work ourselves. We? You don't want to live in a cabin forever, do you? Clara looked at the clearing, at Ethan's face as he started seeing possibilities instead of just ashes, and felt something shift inside her chest. Are you asking me to help you build a house? I'm asking if you want to build a life. Together. A real one. Ethan turned to face her fully. I know this marriage started as, I don't even know what. A rescue, an accident, but it's become something more. At least for me. Claire's throat tightened. What has it become? A second chance I don't deserve but want anyway. Ethan took her hands. You could leave tomorrow. Take half that money and start over somewhere nobody knows your name. I wouldn't blame you. Do you want me to leave? No. I want you to stay. Want us to build something here that isn't haunted by what used to be. He paused. But only if that's what you want too. Clara looked at their joined hands. His scarred and calloused, hers rough from garden work. Two people who'd been broken by loss and somehow found each other in the wreckage. I want to stay, she said. Want to build something. With you. Ethan pulled her close, and Clara felt him shaking, not with grief this time, but with something that might have been hope. They spent the rest of the day walking the property, planning. Ethan showed her where the garden could go, where a barn would make sense, where the house should sit to get morning sun and afternoon shade. His voice grew stronger as he talked, like remembering how to imagine a future was bringing him back to life. We'd need help, he said as the sun started setting. Can't build a house and barn alone. Then we'll hire help, or ask for it. After I've been pushing everyone away, you're allowed to change your mind. People might surprise you. They drove back to the cabin as darkness fell, both of them quieter now, but comfortable in the silence. When they arrived, they found Thomas Garrett waiting on the porch. Ethan's whole body went tense. What do you want? The boy stood quickly. He looked nervous, his hat in his hands. I wanted to apologize. For what my uncle did. For what my father did. For everything. Your father already apologized. I know, but I wanted to say it myself. Thomas met Ethan's eyes with effort. I'm 11. I was 5 when the fire happened. I grew up hearing stories about you being a monster, and I believed them because my father did. But then you saved our ranch, saved us, and I realized everything I'd been told was a lie. Your point? My point is, I'm sorry, and I'm grateful. And if there's ever anything I can do to make it right, I will. Ethan studied the boy for a long moment. Clara could see him struggling, wanting to hold on to anger, but also seeing just a kid trying to apologize for things that weren't his fault. You can't make it right, Ethan said finally, but you can do better than your father and uncle. Can choose to be the kind of man who stands up for what's true instead of what's convenient. Thomas nodded seriously. I'll try. That's all anyone can do. The boy left and Ethan stood on the porch watching him ride away. You didn't have to be kind to him, Clara said. I wasn't being kind. I was being honest. He's just a kid who got taught wrong. Not his fault. You're getting softer. Or I'm just too tired to stay angry at everyone forever. That night, Clara didn't climb to the loft. She stood at the base of the ladder, hesitating, then made a decision. She walked over to where Ethan was banking the fire. I don't want to sleep alone tonight. Ethan looked up, surprised. Clara, I just don't want to be alone. And I don't think you do either. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. The bed's barely big enough for one person. Then we'll make it work. They lay down on Ethan's narrow pallet near the fire, squeezed together in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. Clara felt Ethan's heartbeat against her back, steady and sure. Thank you, he whispered in the darkness. For what? For seeing something worth saving when nobody else did, including me. Clara didn't respond, just reached back and found his hand lacing their fingers together. They fell asleep like that. Two people who'd married as strangers, survived as allies, and were slowly becoming something neither of them had words for yet. The next weeks brought changes that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. Ethan went to town, actually went willingly, and hired men to help clear the valley property. Word spread that he was planning to build, and more people offered assistance than he could accept. Fletcher, the older man who'd lost his daughter to fire, brought his sons and tools. Let us help. It's the least we can do. Margaret Hollins organized the women to provide meals for the work crew. You'll need feeding if you're going to build a house. Even Sheriff Warren showed up with lumber he'd purchased himself. Consider it partial payment for failing you 6 years ago. Ethan accepted the help stiffly at first, clearly uncomfortable with charity. But Clara watched him slowly remember how to work alongside others, how to accept kindness without seeing it as pity. The foundation went up first, stone and timber marking where walls would eventually stand. Not in the same footprint as the old house, Ethan deliberately shifted the building 30 feet to the north, creating distance from where his family had died. It's not the same house, he explained to Clara one evening. It's something new, something we're building together. Clara understood. This wasn't about recreating what was lost. It was about making space for what might still be possible. One afternoon, Silas Garrett rode up to the work site. The men stopped what they were doing, watching tensely as the old rancher climbed down from his horse. I'm not here to cause trouble, Garrett said, his hands up. Just wanted to see the progress. Ethan set down his hammer. Why? Because I destroyed your first house. Figured I owed it to see you build the second one. Garrett looked at the foundation, the lumber, the men working. It's good, solid work. We don't need your approval. I know, but you have it anyway. Garrett turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. Would have been easier to take that money and leave. Building something here takes courage. Or stupidity. Maybe both. Garrett almost smiled. That's what makes it worth doing. After he left, Fletcher came over to Ethan. That took something, him coming here. Took him 6 years to find it. Better late than never? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Maybe. I haven't decided yet. The house took shape slowly through late spring and into summer. Clara divided her time between the cabin and the valley, maintaining their garden while also helping plan the new property. She and Ethan spent evenings drawing layouts, arguing about where rooms should go, imagining what their life might look like in this new space. I want a real kitchen, Clara said one night, with a proper stove and storage. You're planning to cook? Someone has to. You've been eating like a prisoner for 6 years. I like how I eat. You eat burnt meat and stale bread. That's not a preference. That's depression. Ethan laughed, really laughed, and the sound still surprised Clara every time. He was doing that more now, smiling, making jokes. remembering how to be alive instead of just existing. One evening, they were sitting on the foundation of what would become their new house, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of orange and gold. The work crew had left for the day. Everything was quiet except for birds and wind through the trees. "I keep expecting something to go wrong," Ethan said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "This. Us. Building something good. It feels too fragile, like it might shatter if I look at it wrong." Clara leaned against him. "Everything good is fragile. That's what makes it worth protecting." "What if I'm not strong enough to protect it?" "Then we protect it together." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn enough to believe things can get better, even when they shouldn't." "That might be the same thing." They sat together as darkness fell, surrounded by the skeleton of a house that represented both everything they'd lost and everything they might still find. And for the first time in 6 years, Ethan Cole allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future didn't have to be defined by the past. Maybe it could be something new. Something built from ash and hope, and the stubborn determination of two people who refused to let tragedy have the final word. By early autumn, the house had walls and a roof. Not fancy, just sturdy timber and good craftsmanship, but it stood solid against the mountain wind, facing east to catch the morning light. Clara walked through the empty rooms one afternoon, her footsteps echoing on bare floors, and tried to imagine what they'd become. A kitchen here, a bedroom there, maybe eventually a room for children, though neither of them had spoken that possibility out loud yet. Ethan found her standing in what would be their bedroom, staring out the window at the valley below. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "About what?" "All of this. Building a house, staying here, marrying a man you barely knew." Clara turned to face him. "Do you want me to have second thoughts?" "No, but I'd understand if you did." "I don't." She moved closer. "This is the first place I've ever felt like I could actually build something that lasts. Everything else in my life has been temporary, running from one bad situation to the next, never staying long enough to put down roots. I'm tired of running." Ethan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender in a way that still surprised her. "You're not running anymore." "Neither are you." "No, but I'm still figuring out what staying means." They stood together in the empty room that would become their shared space, and Clara realized how much had changed since that day she'd stepped off the stagecoach. She'd come to Cedar Ridge expecting a teaching job, and found instead a man about to be hanged. She'd married him on impulse, driven by some instinct she still didn't fully understand. And now here they were, building a life together from materials they'd both salvaged from wreckage. The move from the cabin to the valley house happened in stages. They brought things down bit by bit: furniture Ethan had made, Clara's few possessions, the family photograph that now sat on every mantel Ethan owned. The cabin remained standing, a reminder of where they'd survived the worst, but home was slowly shifting to this new place they'd built together. On the day they officially moved in, Margaret Hollins and several other women from town arrived with food and household goods: quilts, dishes, curtains Clara hadn't expected, gifts from people trying to make amends in the only ways they knew how. "You don't have to accept charity," Margaret said when she saw Clara's hesitation, "but we wanted you to know you're welcome here, both of you." Clara looked at Ethan, who shrugged. "Your choice." She accepted the gifts, not because they needed them, though they did, but because refusing felt like holding on to anger that no longer served any purpose. These people had failed Ethan 6 years ago. They couldn't undo that, but they were trying to do better now, and Clara had learned that sometimes trying was all anyone could offer. The women helped her arrange the house, chattering about curtain placement and where furniture should go. Ethan disappeared outside with Fletcher and some other men who'd come to help set up the barn foundation. Clara caught glimpses of him through the window, working alongside people who'd once crossed the street to avoid him, and saw how carefully he was learning to trust again. That night, after everyone had left, Clara and Ethan sat on their new porch, real pine boards instead of the rotting planks at the cabin, and watched stars come out over the valley. "Feels strange," Ethan said, "having a house full of things, people coming by without hostile intent, being part of something instead of apart from it." "Good strange or bad strange?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in a year." Clara smiled. A year ago, she doubted Ethan could have imagined living another week, let alone planning for next year. The fact that he could think about the future at all felt like progress. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about the garden. There's enough land here to grow more than we need. We could sell the surplus in town, build up some savings beyond what Garrett paid. You want a farm? I want to build something that's ours. Something that doesn't depend on anyone else's guilt or charity." Ethan considered this. Sarah used to talk about that, having enough land to really grow things, make a living from it. Would that bother you? Doing something she wanted to do? No. I think, he paused, choosing words carefully. I think she'd be happy that someone's actually doing it, even if it's not her. This was new territory for both of them. Ethan had spent so long treating his first family's memory like sacred ground that couldn't be touched, much less built upon. But slowly, he was learning to honor them by living instead of just mourning. "We'd need seeds for spring planting," Clara said, "and probably more help. Can't manage that much land alone. Fletcher's youngest son is looking for work. Good kid, reliable. You trust him?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I'm trying to. Trust doesn't come easy anymore, but I'm trying." That seemed to be Ethan's constant state these days. Trying to believe people could be decent, trying to let go of 6 years of bitterness, trying to imagine a future that wasn't defined by loss. It was hard, messy work with no clear endpoint. But he was doing it, and Clara had learned that showing up and doing the work was more important than doing it perfectly. Winter came early that year, dumping snow across the valley and turning the mountain passes impassable. Clara and Ethan settled into the rhythm of married life in a way they'd never quite managed at the cabin. They cooked together, argued about trivial things like how much wood to put on the fire, shared the same bed without the awkwardness that had marked their early weeks together. One evening in December, Clara was mending a shirt when she felt Ethan watching her. She looked up to find him staring with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" "Nothing. Just, this feels normal, like we've been doing this for years instead of months. Is that good?" "Yeah, it's good." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you regret it? Marrying me that day?" Clara set down her sewing. "Where's this coming from?" "I was thinking about how different your life would be if you'd just walked past that mob. You'd have gotten that teaching job, had a normal life, not been stuck on a mountain with a man everyone thought was a murderer. First, I'm not stuck. I'm choosing to stay." Clara moved to sit beside him. "Second, that teaching job would have paid almost nothing, and I probably would have spent the next 10 years in a boarding house saving pennies. This life might be harder, but it's mine, ours. We built it ourselves. You could have built a life anywhere. But I built this one, with you, and no, I don't regret it." She took his hand. "Do you regret marrying you? No. Regret that you had to marry me to save my life? Every day." "That's stupid." Ethan almost smiled. "Probably. You can't spend your life wishing things were different. They are what they are. All we can do is decide what we do with the time we have." "When did you get so philosophical?" "When I married a man who makes me think about impossible things." Clara squeezed his hand. "Besides, I like impossible things. They keep life interesting." They sat together by the fire while snow piled up outside, and Clara realized she was happy. Not in some overwhelming, dramatic way, just quietly, steadily content with where she was and who she was with. That felt like more than she'd ever expected from life. Spring arrived late and wet, turning the valley into a muddy mess. But once the ground dried enough to work, Clara and Ethan started planting. Fletcher's son, a lanky 18-year-old named Daniel, came to help. They put in rows of vegetables, more than Clara had ever attempted before. Beans, squash, tomatoes, corn, potatoes. If even half of it grew, they'd have plenty to sell. Ethan built a chicken coop and bought hens from a farmer on the far side of the valley. Clara had never kept chickens before, and spent the first week convinced they all hated her. Ethan found this endlessly amusing. "They're chickens," he said, watching her try to collect eggs while the hens squawked indignantly. "They don't have the brain power to hate anyone. This one does. Look at her. She's plotting my murder. That's Hilda. She plots everyone's murder. Just grab the eggs and get out before she pecks you." Clara managed to get the eggs without injury and emerged from the coop victorious. "I don't understand how Sarah did this daily." "Sarah grew up on a farm, had practice." "Well, I didn't. I'm a city girl pretending to be a farmer." "You're doing fine." "I'm covered in chicken droppings and feathers. Like I said, fine. Clara threw a handful of straw at him, and Ethan actually laughed. The sound still caught her by surprise sometimes. How freely he laughed now compared to those early weeks when smiling had seemed to cause him physical pain. The garden flourished through late spring and into summer. Clara had worried she'd kill everything through inexperience, but the plants seemed determined to grow despite her. Daniel proved invaluable, knowing exactly when to water and weed and harvest. By July, they had more vegetables than they could possibly eat. Clara loaded the wagon with surplus and drove into Cedar Ridge, nervous about how she'd be received. She needn't have worried. People bought her vegetables eagerly, and several women stopped to chat like she was just another farmer instead of the woman who'd married the town pariah. Margaret Hollins bought 3 baskets of tomatoes. These are beautiful, Clara. You're a natural. I'm really not. The plants just refuse to die. That's farming in a nutshell. Things grow despite us, not because of us. Clara sold everything she'd brought and drove home with money in her pocket and a strange feeling of accomplishment. Ethan was working on the barn when she arrived, shirtless in the summer heat, and Clara took a moment to appreciate how different he looked from the hollow-eyed man she'd married. He'd put on weight. His skin had color from working outside. He moved with purpose instead of just going through motions. Sold out, she announced. Ethan climbed down from the barn roof. Everything? Every last tomato. Margaret wants to know if we'll have beans next week. Daniel thinks they'll be ready by Friday. Then we're in business. Ethan pulled her close despite being sweaty from work, and Clara didn't mind. This was her life now, vegetables and chickens, and a man who smelled like honest work. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she left Denver, but it was better. Real in a way her old life had never been. By late summer, they'd saved enough money to hire builders for the barn. The structure went up quickly with professional help, and by September they had a proper building for livestock. Ethan bought 2 cows and talked about getting sheep eventually. Sarah's wool dream, Clara said. Modified. We'd sell the sheep for meat and wool both. More practical. She'd approve of practical. Would she? Ethan looked uncertain. I barely remember what she'd approve of anymore. It's been 7 years. You remember enough. The important parts. Sometimes I feel guilty. For moving forward. For being happy with you when they're gone. Clara had learned to recognize these moments, when grief grabbed Ethan unexpectedly and pulled him backward. She didn't try to talk him out of it anymore, just sat with him while he felt it. You're allowed to be happy, she said quietly. Being happy doesn't mean you love them less. How do you know? Because I'm happy now, and that doesn't diminish how much I loved my parents, different people, different times, both real. Ethan pulled her close, and they stood together in the barn doorway, watching the sun set over the valley. The chickens made settling noises in their coop. The cows chewed grass peacefully. Everything felt almost unbearably normal, in the best possible way. That night, lying in bed, Ethan spoke into the darkness. I want to tell you something about that day you stopped the hanging. Clara waited. I'd already decided that if they put the rope around my neck, I wasn't going to fight it. Was going to let them do it and finally be done with everything. I was so tired, Clara. Tired of fighting, tired of surviving, tired of carrying all that grief alone. Death seemed easier. Ethan. Let me finish. Then you walked through that crowd and said, marry me, and I thought you were insane. But you looked at me like I was human, not a monster, not a ghost, just a person, and I realized I'd forgotten what that felt like. His voice cracked. You saved my life, but not in the way you think. It wasn't stopping the hanging. It was reminding me that maybe I was still worth saving. Clara turned to face him in the darkness. You were always worth saving. I didn't believe that then. I'm starting to believe it now. What changed? You, this, having something to build instead of just memories to carry. Ethan found her hand under the blankets. I'm not good with words. Sarah was good with words. But I need you to know that you gave me back my life. And I don't take that lightly. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. You gave me a life too. A real one. Before you, I was just drifting from one bad situation to the next, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. Now I have a home, a purpose, someone who sees me. I see you. I know. That's why I stayed. They lay together in the quiet, 2 people who'd found each other at their worst and somehow managed to build something at their best. Autumn brought the harvest, and Clara was shocked by how much they'd grown. Daniel helped them bring in bushels of vegetables, more than they'd ever sell in town. Clara started learning to preserve food, canning, drying, storing in the root cellar Ethan had built. The work was exhausting, but satisfying in a way her old life never had been. One afternoon, Silas Garrett rode up to the house. Clara tensed automatically, but Ethan just set down his work and walked over to meet him. Garrett, Cole, I heard you had surplus vegetables. Wondered if you'd sell to me. My kitchen could use a steady supplier. Ethan studied the older man carefully. This a charity purchase? No, it's business. You grow good produce. I need reliable supply. Seems straightforward. Nothing with you is straightforward. Garrett absorbed that without flinching. Fair enough, but the offer's genuine. I'll pay market rate. More if the quality stays this good. Ethan glanced at Clara, who shrugged. This was his decision. All right, Ethan said finally. We'll deliver weekly. Payment on delivery. Agreed. Garrett turned to leave, then paused. Thomas asks about you sometimes. Wants to know if you're doing well. Tell him I'm fine. I will. Garrett mounted his horse. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. Would have been easier to leave and start over somewhere nobody knew you. Takes courage to build something here. Or stupidity. That too. Garrett almost smiled. But sometimes they're the same thing. After he left, Clara moved beside Ethan. You okay? Yeah, just strange. Doing business with the man who destroyed my life. Maybe that's growth, being able to separate past from present. Maybe it's just practical. His money spends the same as anyone else's. Can it be both? Ethan considered this. I suppose it can. They went back to work, and Clara realized this was what healing actually looked like. Not dramatic forgiveness or sudden peace. Just the slow, difficult work of deciding to move forward, even when the past still hurt. Winter arrived again, their second in the Valley house. Clara had learned to love the quiet months when snow isolated them from town, and they could just exist together without outside demands. They read by the fire, played cards, talked about plans for spring planting. Ethan was teaching her chess, though she was terrible at it. You're not thinking ahead, he said, watching her lose yet another game. I'm thinking ahead. I'm just thinking ahead to the wrong things. Like what? Like what we're having for dinner, whether the chickens need more food, if Daniel's going to show up on time next week. Ethan smiled. You're thinking ahead to real things. I'm just moving wooden pieces around. The pieces matter to you. They used to, when I had nothing else to think about. He started resetting the board. Now they're just something to do while I sit with you. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. You're getting sentimental in your old age. I'm 36. Ancient. You're 27, practically a child. This child is about to beat you at chess. No, you're not. He was right. She lost again, but she didn't mind. Spring came around once more, and with it, news that shocked the valley. Silas Garrett was selling his ranch. The old man had taken ill over the winter and decided it was time to step back. Thomas, still only 12, was too young to run the operation. What will you do? Ethan asked when Silas came to tell them personally. Move to Denver. Thomas needs schooling I can't provide here, and I'm tired, ready to let go of things I've held too tightly for too long. The ranch is your whole life. Was my whole life. Now it's just property. Silas looked older than his years. I'm selling to the Hendersons. Good people. They'll treat the land right. After he left, Clara found Ethan standing in the garden, staring at nothing. You okay? I spent 6 years hating that man, wishing terrible things on him. Now he's sick and leaving, and I don't feel anything. Not satisfaction, not sympathy. Just nothing. Maybe that's closure. Not caring anymore because it's finally over. Is it over? As over as it's going to get. Ethan nodded slowly. I can live with that. That summer brought new developments. Margaret Hollins asked Clara to help teach some of the Valley children basic reading and math. 3 families had young kids who needed education, and Clara found herself doing the teaching job she'd originally come to Cedar Ridge for. She held classes in their kitchen twice a week, and Ethan would work outside, occasionally glancing through the window at Clara surrounded by children. One afternoon, she caught him watching with an expression that made her heart ache. After the children left, she found him in the barn. What were you thinking earlier, when you were watching me teach? Ethan didn't pretend not to understand. I was thinking about Emma and Thomas. How they'd be older now if they'd lived. Maybe learning the same things. Does it hurt, seeing other children? Less than it used to. Now it's just Bittersweet. Sad, but not unbearable. He turned to face her. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you want children? Someday? Clara's breath caught. They'd never discussed this directly. Do you? I don't know. Part of me is terrified of losing anyone else I love, but part of me thinks Sarah would be angry if I let fear stop me from living fully. What do you want, Ethan? Not what Sarah would want. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. I want to be brave enough to build a family again. Even knowing how badly it can end, even knowing I might lose everything again, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life playing it safe, and that's not living. That's just existing. Clara moved closer. I want children, eventually, when we're ready, if we're ever ready. We might never be ready. Then we'll figure it out as we go, like everything else. Ethan pulled her into an embrace. How did I get so lucky? Luck had nothing to do with it. I chose you. You chose me. We chose this. Best decision I never planned to make. Same. They stood together in the barn while outside the valley hummed with summer life, and Clara realized this was happiness. Not perfect, not without pain or fear or uncertainty, but real and chosen and worth protecting. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. The colors no longer made Ethan flinch the way they once had. Fire had taken his first family, but it had also brought Clara into his life during that wildfire. Destruction and creation, loss and gain, ending and beginning, all tangled together in ways impossible to separate. I've been thinking, Clara said, about the photograph. Sarah and the children. What about it? You should display it properly, not hidden away. They were part of your life. Pretending they weren't doesn't honor them. Ethan looked uncertain. Won't that be strange, having my first wife's picture in the house I share with you? No. It would be strange to pretend she never existed. She shaped who you are. I don't want you to forget her. I just want you to remember her with love instead of only grief. You're more generous than I deserve. Stop saying that. You deserve someone who sees all of you, past included. The next day, Ethan hung the photograph in the main room, right above the fireplace where everyone could see it. Sarah smiled out from the frame, surrounded by children who'd never grow up. It hurt to look at, but it was a clean hurt now instead of the infected wound it had been. They'd like you, Ethan said, standing beside Clara, as they both looked at the picture. Sarah would appreciate how stubborn you are. Emma would love your stories. Thomas would follow you around asking questions. You think so? I know so. He put his arm around her. You're part of this family now, even the parts that came before you. Clara leaned into him, and together they stood in the house they'd built from ash and determination, looking at the faces of people who'd been loved and lost but never forgotten. Time moved forward the way it always did. Daniel got married and brought his new wife to help with the farm. The vegetable business grew enough that they hired another farmhand. The barn got full with livestock. Clara's teaching expanded to include more children from neighboring valleys. And on a spring morning, 3 years after Clara had stepped off that stagecoach, she stood in the kitchen watching Ethan play with their daughter, a dark-haired girl named Rose, who had Sarah's laugh and Ethan's serious eyes. Their son, barely 6 months old and still unnamed, nursed in Clara's arms while she supervised breakfast. Ethan caught her watching and smiled. What? Nothing. Just thinking about how different everything is from when we started. Different good or different bad? Different impossible. If you told me that day in Cedar Ridge that I'd end up here, married to you, running a farm, raising children, I'd have thought you were insane. If you told me I'd survive long enough to have any of this, I'd have felt the same way. Ethan bounced Rose on his knee, making her giggle. Seems like impossible things happen more often than we expect. Only when we're stubborn enough to make them happen. Is that what we did? That's exactly what we did. Later, after the children were asleep and the farm was quiet, Clara and Ethan stood on their porch watching stars come out over the valley. The same stars that had witnessed tragedy here years ago now looked down on something new. Something built not from forgetting the past, but from refusing to let it define the future. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked quietly, stepping in front of that mob. Every single day. He looked startled. Really? No, you idiot. It's the best decision I ever made. Clara took his hand. Why would I regret finding you? Because your life would have been easier if you'd walked away. Easier isn't better. I spent my whole life taking the easy path, and it got me nowhere. This path was hard. Still is. But it's mine, ours. We built it together. Ethan pulled her close. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I know. You show me every day. They stood together in the darkness, two people who'd been broken by loss and remade by choice. The past hadn't disappeared. Sarah and Emma and Thomas still existed in photographs and memories. Marcus Garrett's crime still echoed in burned ground. 6 years of isolation still left scars. But the past wasn't all there was anymore. There was also this. A house full of life. A farm that fed families. Children who'd never know the weight of their father's grief because he'd learned to carry it without letting it crush him. A marriage that started as an act of desperate kindness and became something neither of them could have planned or predicted. Love that was chosen every day, not in dramatic gestures but in small moments. Hauling water, planting seeds, teaching children, feeding chickens, building something that lasted. And as Clara stood on that porch with Ethan's arms around her and their children sleeping inside, she understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about forgetting trauma or pretending pain didn't exist. It was about deciding that tragedy wouldn't have the final word. That life could be rebuilt from ash if you were stubborn enough to keep trying, even when everything felt hopeless. Sometimes all it took was one person willing to step through a hostile crowd and choose compassion over convenience. One person willing to see humanity in someone everyone else had written off. One person willing to stay when leaving would have been easier. And sometimes that was enough to change everything. The stars wheeled overhead. The valley slept peacefully. And in a house built from second chances, two people who'd survived the worst stood together facing whatever came next. Not because the future was certain or safe or easy, but because they'd learned that sometimes the only way to truly live was to risk everything on the stubborn belief that broken things could be made whole again. Not perfect. Not unmarked by what had come before, but whole in the ways that mattered. And that, Clara thought, as sleep finally took her that night, was more than most people ever got. It was more than enough. 2/2.